Welcome to a glimpse into the future, a future that will look back on today and mark it as the beginning of the great obamademics of the 21st century. Authorities within our government, CDC, and the World Health Organization know full well that allowing an invasion of so-called refugees to cross our southern borders is less defendable against and potentially more deadly than any terrorist attack. And yet they permit it. They actually encourage it. I am Dr. Scott McGill, prior service Marine Corps, prior service United States Army Medical Corps, and the Executive Director of Veterans in Defense of Liberty, an organization of veterans dedicated to restoring and maintaining our great constitutional republic. And I have two great passions, my patients and my country, and I will go to any length necessary, pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship in order to keep them both alive and well. St. Augustine stated, "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself." The truth is the antithesis of political correctness. Truth is the defender against the paradox of tolerance. And recall, the paradox of tolerance states, in a free society, unlimited tolerance of the intolerant will ultimately lead to the destruction of tolerance and the tolerant. In other words, unlimited tolerance will lead to intolerance. The left has used this very effectively against us. In conjunction with their Alinsky tactic, they have forced us to become tolerant of way too much. And we see this occurring in the tolerance of homosexuality, same-sex marriage, in the tolerating of driving God from our schools and our culture, in tolerating abortionists, 55 million plus children. And I tell you that a nation's survival, our nation's survival, demands intolerance. And we must be intolerant of an open border policy. Throughout history, no culture has survived multiculturalism, and America will be no different. And what follows is taken from Veterans in Defense of Liberty's position paper on the pending obamademic. The Obama administration is allowing tens of thousands of illegals to flood unchecked into our border states, bringing with them a host of invisible hitchhikers carrying dangerous diseases. These contagions will cause in time epidemics, not an epidemic, but multiple epidemics of potentially unbefore-seen magnitude that will ravage our citizens, killing millions. And this is the truth. The truth is, there may be chaos on the southwestern border of the United States, but there is no crisis on our southwestern border. Not the way the media uses the term. The media uses the term as if though there's a predicament on the border, a dilemma, there's a quandary down on the border. Oh, there is a mess on the border. No, there is not a mess on the border, and there is not a crisis on the border. So if that's the case, what is going on along that land that we refer to as the southwest border of the United States? The truth is, what is going on down there is nothing short of an invasion of the United States of America. Consider, if you would, the definitions of the term invasion. An act of invading, especially incursion of the army for conquest or plunder. Especially the incursion of an army, not only the incursion of an army. But the important terms in this definition are conquest and plunder. As an act or instance of invading or entering as the enemy. The entrance or advent of anything troublesome or harmful. Entrance as if to take possession or overrun. Remember this one, we'll come back to it in a moment. Entrance as if to take possession or overrun. Or the infringement by intrusion. It is an invasion on the southwest border of our great nation. It is an invasion with the use of weapons of mass destruction. Listen to the words of Governor Rick Perry from July 2014 on the news.
There have been, over the course of the last 5 years, since the fall of '08, over 203,000 individuals who have come into Texas illegally that have been booked into our county jails. Those individuals have been accounted for over 3,000 homicides and over 8,000 sexual assaults. We can't afford to wait for the Washington to secure this border. We've had enough, and we're going to secure the southern border.
The truth is, I'm not really sure when Governor Perry spoke of the fall of 2008, was he referring to the season or was he referring to the election in November? Don't know. But what I am sure of, 203,000 booked into the county jails, 3,000 homicides, 8,000 rapes. I'm sure that the family members of those homicide victims would surely consider this something troublesome or harmful. And the 8,000 rapes, not only troublesome and harmful, that sure seems to fit the category of plunder to me as well. This is an invasion on the southwest border, a large-scale onset that fits many categories. The truth is, as you recall, there were multiple definitions of the term invasion. I dare say what's going on our southwest border fits virtually each and every one of these definitions. I do find number 3 a little interesting, entrance as to take possession or overrun. Bear in mind that Mexicans genuinely believe they had their land stolen from them by the United States. This is something that they were raised with. This is something that they were educated with. This is something that is just part of their nature. They had their land stolen. Hence, they have every right to reclaim it. By definition, crisis is an unstable or crucial time or state of affairs in which a decisive change is impending, especially one with the distinct possibility of a highly undesirable outcome. If we refuse to recognize this is an invasion, and if we refuse to treat it as an invasion and fight diligently against it, then we definitely are in a crucial time in which a decisive change is impending, a change with the distinct possibility of a highly undesirable outcome, the death of our culture, the death of our nation, and the death of our way of life. The truth is, America is not just a country, it is a culture. And the American culture springs forth from that spirit that dwells within each of us. And that has led to the development of the greatest nation this world has ever seen. A nation that should continue to reshape the world. But it does rest upon 3 sturdy but not indestructible pillars. Granted, there is overlap between these pillars, but each bears its own individual weight of our society. And at the core of the cultural pillar is family, and family values, hard work, and strong religious beliefs. All 3 pillars rest upon the strongest of foundations, the Bible, and the values therein contained. But the invasion on our border is a brilliant political blueprint intended to weaken and collapse the financial, cultural, and healthcare pillars upon which our great country stands, thereby replacing the American spirit, American capitalism, and American Americanism with a socialistic society. And don't forget, it's been said that socialism is only communism in a hurry. But both socialism and communism are political models which never have, nor may they ever work. As good people do nothing. Oh, the foundation will never weaken or crack, but as this invasion fault line intensity on our southern border increases, and it shakes and collapses America's weight-bearing structures, then 2 centuries of historical progress will be torn down. The truth is, America will fall as these pillars collapse, and freedom and liberty will only live in the hearts of those who remember. And as they die, so too will the only stabilizing force on earth, that last great hope for mankind. With them shall perish that Camelot known as America, and the future of humanity will be thrown back into that dark, cold abyss of wretchedness and gloom. For history has proven that once lost, freedom and liberty are never regained. Recall the warning from Daniel Webster. Hold on, my friends, to the Constitution and to the republic for which it stands. Miracles do not cluster, and what has happened once in 6,000 years may not happen again. Hold on to the Constitution, for if the American Constitution should fail, there will be anarchy throughout the world. Are we not seeing anarchy throughout the world? Because our Constitution is failing, and it is failing because Americans are failing it. Unless we take hold of the situation promptly, that anarchy will come to our own front yard, and it will come through the back door of America, our southern borders. The truth is, before we move on and look at 2 of the most crucial articles in the Constitution of the United States, particularly as it relates to today's subject, let's pause for a moment and review what I feel are 4 of the greatest works of literature in world history, at least of man's works of literature, obviously. For they, taken in total, have given us the America that most of us know and love so dearly. The first of these, of course, was in 1215, the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta is one of the earliest ancestors of the United States Constitution. It was the first document to impose by a group of his subjects upon the King of England an attempt to limit his power by law, and in so doing protect their rights. The Charter is widely known through the English-speaking world anyway as a vitally important part of that protracted historical process that led to the rule of constitutional law. The Magna Carta was really a religious document. It recognized a higher law, and it was concerned with imposing an improvement upon the health of the soul of the king and of their ancestors and their heirs. It was intended to honor God and to exalt the Holy Church. It is from the Magna Carta that Blackwell drew the law of natures and of nature's God. Subsequent to 1215, we move on to 1620 with the signing of the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact was the first contract to ever be drawn up in what was to become the United States, and this was written on the Mayflower before they stepped on shore. Also a religious contract, in the name of God, amen, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. Whoa, can they say that? Well, they did say that. Don't even try to tell me this was not founded as a Christian nation. Then from 1620 to 1776, we have the Declaration of Independence. We all know quite well. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator. Again, a religious document which really laid the groundwork for what was to come in 1789, The United States Constitution. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and provide for the common defense. Provide for the common defense? I think we have truly missed the boat. It is not providing for the common defense. I think it is ignoring the common defense. But look at this if you would. From 1215 to 2014, 799 years. For 799 years, humanity has struggled to establish life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to provide for a stable world where all could recognize the fruits of their labor. And our generation is on the brink of rendering these great efforts for 800 years as but a footnote in the future history of mankind. The truth is, Article 4, Section 4, requires the United States to protect each state against invasion. As unwilling as the United States is to protect states against the invasion from the South, one indisputably legitimate question is how will they protect the states and the people when the Islamic states come to us? For they will come to us, or are they already here? The founders' insight was beyond compare, for they saw the future which has arrived and is upon us. And the perfect storm is gathering, but there is hope, for they set up a federal government that would protect us from the state abuse, and state governments which would protect us from federal abuse. For you see, it is all about us, we the people. No, it was all for the benefit of we the people. Article 1, Section 10, requires that no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in the time of peace, enter into any agreement or compact, or with a foreign power, or engage in war, unless actually invaded, which we are, or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay, which we are. Actually, all of the southern border states, particularly Texas, must serve notice to the federal government that the states have awakened from their deep slumber of apathy. Like the patient arising from a coma, the sovereignty muscles of the state have been atrophied to a great extent and need to be exercised, and they need to be exercised now. It is time for the states to invoke their constitutional right to fight back against this virulent invasion. They have the responsibility and the obligation to their citizenry, and the citizenry must demand it. The truth is that the administration is allowing tens of thousands of illegals to flood unchecked into the border states, bringing with them a host of invisible hitchhikers of dangerous diseases. It is time for the states to invoke their constitutional rights to fight back against this virulent invasion. Notice that all of the boxcar doors are closed. We have no way of knowing how many children are likely crammed inside each one of them. There are increasing signs that terrorists and criminal gangs are exploiting the porous southern borders and the illicit flow of human traffic. In addition to the innocent children being smuggled over the border, bussed or flown throughout the country that could foment a severe medical crisis. Many of these children come from areas where sanitation standards, nutrition, and medical care are rudimentary at best. They travel north jammed together for days in unsanitary trucks or railroad cars, the perfect environment for the spread of contagions. Many arrive in the United States infected with communicable diseases, such as drug-resistant tuberculosis, leprosy, Ebola, MRSA, scabies, chickenpox, chagas, polio, swine flu, and potentially smallpox, and a host of other serious, contagious, infectious, and deadly diseases, which are the seeds of pandemic. The infected children will thus become unwittingly biological weapons, weapons of mass destruction. And the truth is, using these children in this fashion, or allowing these children to be used in this fashion, as biological weapons, as weapons of mass destruction, perhaps represents the largest, most despicable, deliberate act of political child abuse in all of history. At this very moment, virtually all states in the Union are being actually invaded and are in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. Enemies of our republic, enabled by our own government to freely enter our states and neighborhoods, include violent criminals, those who traffic in illicit drugs and human beings, and even terrorists waging jihad against the United States. This invasion is a war, irregular warfare, asymmetric warfare, no doubt, but warfare none the same. The actual extent of the threat from this invasion is unknown, or it's being kept a secret. We do know that the federal government advertised in January on fedbizops.gov for escorts for up to 65,000 unaccompanied minors, indicating that this invasion of illegals was strategized, organized, and choreographed before January, and we didn't hear about it until June or July. This does represent one of the most despicable, deliberate acts of political child abuse in all of history. The truth is, obamademics are coming, and it doesn't stop with scabies. The problem is, thousands of these children are infected with disease, and this is not Ellis Island 1914, where immigrants with disease were quarantined or deported. Oh no. Under Obama, the border is wide open, and all women and minors are being released into the American population and being told to report to an immigration hearing in places as far away as Hartford, Connecticut. Oh, they'll show up, won't they? No. The vast majority, more than 75%, never show up and are thus lost in a town near you with their diseases unchecked and untreated. The resulting infectious outbreaks may well be of epic proportion and recorded in the annals of history as the great obamademics of the 21st century. As the great obamademics spreads from the border states to ravage the rest of the country, it potentially could result in the deaths of tens of millions of Americans. Tens of millions of Americans. A question we'll bring up a little later, but I'd like you to ask yourself as we go through the following truth. Who is it that we battle asymmetrically today that has proven a willingness to use children as weapons, to use them as carriers of suicide bombs, to use them as cover to harbor their missiles, to use them as personal shields in combat? Ask yourself that. The truth is the degree to which, the depth to which this incredulous reality troubles me is absolutely ineffable. It is beyond the ability of the human tongue to articulate. It is truly more than tongue can tell, and it begs to be revisited before we move on to look at the invisible invaders. Perhaps most alarming are the tens of thousands of these victims of political child abuse, the innocent children pouring through our southern borders and bust or flown throughout the country. These shamelessly exploited innocents are truly potential biological weapons, weapons of mass destruction, against an American people who are helpless and may fall by the millions to the horrors of, as we mentioned before, potentially smallpox, tuberculosis, leprosy, Ebola, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, MRSA, scabies, chickenpox, chagas, polio, and a host of other serious, contagious, infectious, and deadly diseases. And these are the seeds of pandemics. A great question posed the other day by a very dear friend that fits here so well. And I want you to ask yourself, at what point does the unthinkable become the unspeakable before it becomes the undeniable? The truth is, now you may look at this and say, wait a minute, there are some deadly diseases here, but we have vaccinations for polio and whooping cough and so on. Very true, but vaccine-preventable diseases like chickenpox and measles and whooping cough can absolutely spread like wildfire among the unvaccinated. Writing for the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, Dr. Elizabeth Lee Villette stated that Americans tend to be complacent about infectious disease, but we need to keep in mind that in spite of our successes, infectious disease remains the leading cause of death worldwide, and in the top 10 causes of death within the United States. Many of the diseases of concern, such as Ebola, have no effective treatment. Biological agents like viruses and bacteria are not like radiological weapons that decay continually once they're released, or chemical agents that are degraded in the environment and require a threshold of concentrations to be deadly. Disease-causing agents have a doubling time, not half-lives. Disease agents continue to increase exponentially as long as there are people to be exposed. This medical crisis on our border is a ticking time bomb. Are we now in the early stages of a Plan B, a biological attack on the homeland? Are we? Let us take a look at a few of these potentially deadly diseases coming to an area near you soon. The truth is, wait a minute. You going to tell me you want to talk about smallpox? The last case of smallpox in the United States was in 1949. There hadn't been a case in the world since 1978. Okay, smallpox is a disease caused by a virus, but it is supposed to reside in only 2 highly secure laboratories on the planet, in vials, frozen, at the CDC. I'll trust that. And in Russia. In 1848, Thomas Macaulay, in his book, The History of England, called this the most terrible of all ministers of death. It is the only human disease that has ever successfully been eradicated. But not long ago, workers clearing out an old storage room in Bethesda, Maryland, at the campus of the National Institute of Health, have found a forgotten box of 6 vials that contain smallpox. Forgotten at the National Institute of Health? From 2002 to 2004, military members and some of our civilian healthcare workers received the vaccine again as protection against a possible bioterrorist attack. And as well as we can tell, they appear to be still being vaccinated. Following the World Trade Center and anthrax attack in 2001. The main concern was that smallpox release would come as a bioterrorist attack from a rogue state possessing an undisclosed viral stockpile. What today's news underlines, though, is that there may indeed be innocent, forgotten stockpiles of virus in the world. In fact, in a book written by David Koplow, he said that neglected samples of variola have been found in laboratory freezers 3 times before. It's being found one more time. And of all places, inside an agency of one of the governments tasked with guarding it. It seems to make it less likely that smallpox will ever meet its final death. And the truth is, what about an obamademic of tuberculosis? Tuberculosis is a real deal, even though the United States has one of the lowest incident rates in the world. Yeah, Mexico's prevalence is 10 times greater than that of the United States. In fact, it's estimated between 2002 and 2020, over 1 trillion people will become infected and 36 million will die. This is a highly contagious disease. The United States has one of the lowest rates, and Mexico has a high one. And a few years ago, multi-drug resistant strain of tuberculosis has emerged. And to cure a patient, if you can, from drug-resistant tuberculosis costs over $250,000, and it can cost up to $1.2 million per person. And even with this kind of money, half of the patients die. In July, it was reported that an illegal Mexican alien carrying the drug-resistant tuberculosis went missing from an emergency room. When they asked him to stay, in the area for treatment, but he disappeared. He vanished. And he vanished in March. We only heard about it in July. I suppose, if you'll excuse the pun, I suppose he's living the American dream. Yeah, just another illegal consumer, I guess. Immigration may, without a doubt, become our greatest disease pipeline. And the truth is, there's just a little more interesting information on tuberculosis. In his article in the Journal of American Medical Association, Dr. Ruben Granich stated that infected patients were 4 times more likely to die of their disease and twice as likely to transmit the disease to others. But he was very politically correct, was very reluctant to use the word illegal or even undocumented aliens in his report. But he noted that 407 known cases of medically resistant tuberculosis, 84% were foreign-born patients, mainly from Mexico and the Philippines, who had been in the United States for less than 5 years. And here's an interesting scenario to consider. Suppose one of these infected illegal aliens comes across the border, gets a job in one of our metropolitan hospitals. Say he's working in dietary or as an aide. Or suppose he just infects somebody, a United States citizen, who works in a hospital. And this citizen goes to work in dietary, where they worked for years, has no idea that he or she is infected and is exposing everyone in the hospital. The impact will be absolutely unfathomable. The truth is, it's back. What about the scourge of biblical days, leprosy, a disease that struck fear in the hearts of populations for generations? We don't hear about it much today because with the advent of antibiotic therapy, it's been fairly easily controlled. In the 40 years prior to 2002, there were only 900 total cases of leprosy in the United States. However, between 2002 and 2005, there were 9,000 cases. And even in those days, most of those were illegal aliens. As noted in his article, Leprosy in America, a New Cause for Concern, Dr. Levi's, head of the New York Hansen's Disease Clinic, and leprosy today is called Hansen's disease. According to the doctor, it's creeping into the United States. This is a real phenomenon. It is a public health threat. New York is endemic now and nobody's noticed. And in the same article, Dr. Terry Williams, who runs a Houston-based clinic serving leprosy patients across southern Texas, said that the bulk of the cases treated by his clinic go figure, were immigrants. A lot of our cases are imported, he said. We see patients from everywhere, Africa, Philippines, China, and South America. Leprosy is going to, just like tuberculosis, and particularly drug-resistant leprosy, is going to come with this tidal wave of immigration as an invisible hitchhiker and spread across our country. Well, the truth is obamademics may also include Ebola. This is a disease that we've heard quite a bit about of late. For those who are totally disinterested, Ebola is derived from the Ebola River in the Congo, which is one of two places it was originally found. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about Ebola. You've heard it all. A couple of really important points, though, I think. Symptoms can start 2 days to 3 weeks after original contact with the virus. And that's ample time for somebody with Ebola to travel a long distance by plane and arrive in the United States. Also, don't forget, it's not just Mexicans, Central Americans, South Americans that are coming across our southwest border. 75 nations have now been identified that are contributing some of their citizens to this illegal immigration that we see occurring. Another interesting point is that even though the mortality rate is very high, 50 to 90%, and most of that is secondary to shock. As a hemorrhagic fever, you can bleed to death, but generally it's shock that'll get you. But in men who survive, they may be able to transmit the disease sexually for nearly 2 months. And this is incredible if you hearken back to Governor Perry's comment on 8,000 rapes. Heaven forbid those men survive and go forth and plunder. What I do want to mention something about, however, is the Ebola. And I want to preface that by saying that Veterans in Defense of Liberty stands in support of the right of American citizens with Ebola hemorrhagic fever to return to the United States for medical treatment. This is the same position we would take for any American who travels aboard and contacts, for example, drug-resistant tuberculosis or any other potentially deadly disease. Whether traveling for business or pleasure, doing the government's work or the Lord's, Americans in need of the world's best care must never be told by their fellow citizens, tough luck, buddy. Don't come home until you're better. The fact is, America still offers the world's best medical treatment, and is far better equipped to isolate and treat contagious disease and save the life of a patient than it is in Africa. By the way, Mr. Vice President, should you be listening, Africa is a continent, not a country. But that kind of brings us to the current Ebola scare. There's been a continuous public denial, at times hostile, even hysterical, that Ebola could not possibly be spread by airborne means. This absolute and unquestionable position has been spewing forth as talking points by the United States government, the media, and the expert. Yet all three entities know well that this is an unresolved question. So why this denial? Why this official Ebola? In 2012, it was reported from a study in Canada that reputable researchers had taken a group of guinea pigs and inoculated them with the Ebola virus. They inoculated them by applying it to their nose, and within a very short period of time, all of the pigs contacted and came down with Ebola, as one would expect. However, they had been moved into a room with a cage that contained several monkeys. And within a very few days, 2 of the monkeys contacted Ebola. And within a total of 8 days, all monkeys had contacted Ebola. And all monkeys, upon their demise, demonstrated to have significant pulmonary involvement. This would tend to indicate quite strongly that indeed airborne transmission is possible. So why the denial? Another issue that I would like you to consider, we watched these two patients come from Africa to Atlanta, Georgia. They were all in isolation with HEPA filters. The talking point is that this is contacted by body fluids, the same way that AIDS is contacted, the same way hepatitis is contacted. But if we were bringing patients with AIDS from Africa back over to the United States, do you think they would be in a HEPA-filtered isolation tent? I don't think so. Sick American citizens have the right to return home in order to obtain medical care. American citizens have a right to get the facts from their own government in order to know the truth and to be able to respond accordingly. It should be obvious to the most casual observer that there is a significant possibility that the Ebola virus may be transmitted by contact with body fluid as well as the airborne route. With today's understanding of the disease, this repeated, blatant, shameless cover-up of this reality is the great official Ebola. The truth is, H1N1 already is coming across the border fairly significantly. Remember, nearly 600 unaccompanied, undocumented children were quarantined not long ago on a U.S. naval base. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. You're definitely familiar with the swine flu. It's important to realize respiratory failure is the most common cause of mortality. And generally, that's going to be patients that are immunocompromised, the old, the frail, those with cancer, the very young. There is something that I do want to dispel, however. You hear it every now and then that H1N1 virus can also evolve into a bacterial infection and eventually may result in sepsis. Well, it can result in sepsis, but I guarantee you it does not evolve into a bacterial infection. The simple fact is the chances of it doing that in our lifetime is outside of the realm of possibility. What happens is, because of the infection, it compromises our immune system and patients become more susceptible to bacterial infections and sepsis, which is an infection in the bloodstream. Another issue I think that is very interesting is that on July 31st of 2014, President Obama revised an executive order 13295 and revised the list of quarantinable communicable diseases. And guess what was left off of that this time around? He was revising President Bush's executive order. But now the quote was, this subscription does not apply to influenza. So influenza and H1N1 have, by executive order, been removed as quarantinable communicable diseases. The truth is, hepatitis A, B, and C are all going to increase across the United States as a part of obamademics. All the hepatitis A, B, and C are viral infections that affect the liver. Hepatitis A used to be known as infectious hepatitis. And remember, back in 2004, 650 people were infected at a Mexican restaurant in Pennsylvania. Hepatitis B is a major concern across the globe, with an estimated 1.3 million people in the United States currently infected. Hepatitis B actually is 50 to 100 times more infective than is HIV. But what I think is interesting on this slide, even though the prevalence on the left demonstrates the prevalence for hepatitis A, notice that the developed countries, the United States included, has a much lower rate of the hepatitis than do the developing countries. However, the red sure abuts right up to our southwest borders, and a lot of hepatitis we'll see coming across. Okay, the truth is, I bet very few of you have ever heard of this one. It's not a major player. This fever, pronounced either dengue or dengue, depending on where you're from. is an infectious tropical disease caused by a virus, of which there are 5 subtypes, and is closely related to the virus causing West Nile disease and yellow fever, passed from person to person by mosquito. Also sometimes called bone break fever. Dengue causes severe pain in the bones and joints and muscles. Most cases, it'll go away in a week or 2 without treatment. Some 5% of the cases, though, do develop into a life-threatening hemorrhagic fever, which will result in bleeding, low platelets. You can drown in your own blood with this one, ultimately leading to dengue shock syndrome with dangerously low pressures, blood pressures. And about half of that 5%, or 2.5% of those affected, will die. Again, if you look at the distribution for 2006, not an uncommon event in Mexico. This is, as the next slide we'll look at, the major problem. This one is not a big issue because most of the time, if your doctor doesn't recognize it, it's going to heal itself. But very few physicians in the United States see or deal with dengue fever, so it's not high on their list of differential diagnoses. The truth is, the incidence of Chagas disease is already on the upswing in the United States. And as you can see from the distribution on the left, it's well into Mexico. Chagas is caused by being kissed by the kissing bug, or actually being bit by the kissing bug, and a parasite is released. It'll crawl into the bite wound and infect the patient. These bugs are common in areas of poverty where people live closely together and can easily be brought across the border. What's really strange about Chagas disease is that A, it's not often thought about, but the signs and symptoms are very, very mild, if even there at all. However, after the acute phase, which can last for several weeks to a month, the parasite has implanted itself in heart muscle, in the bowel and the intestines. And some 20 years later, after the initial infection, patient can develop irregular heartbeat, congestive heart failure. And if they do develop congestive heart failure, they ultimately will die within a year or 2, or they can experience sudden cardiac arrest. More interestingly, it also weakens the ventricles of the heart, and some 20 years after you've been bitten by this kissing bug, the ventricles can just explode and you'll die instantly. The same thing can happen with the bowel. The simple fact is you might get bitten by it and never even realize it, because most people do not realize that they're infected. But coming to a poverty-stricken area near you soon. Well, there you go. Just a partial list of these invisible hitchhikers that are coming across the border within the tsunami of illegal aliens that are presently invading our southwestern border. But they will create an ominous public health crisis, the likes of which the world has never seen. Obviously, those most at risk to these difficult-to-treat diseases are going to be the elderly, the children, immunosuppressed cancer patients, patients with chronic lung disease, or patients with congestive heart failure. And bear in mind, these are not mutually exclusive events. We may see several of them come across at any time and begin to ravage the United States. The truth is, obamademics is going to impact not only the healthcare pillar, but also the financial pillar that supports America. As the California representative said in 2013, hospitals are closing across the country due to the burden of illegal immigration. And with this ominous public health crisis, the likes of which America has never seen, a whole host of medical facilities will find it impossible to stay open under the financial burden of this huge, unfunded federal mandate to provide free medical care to illegal immigrants, and many of those that they infect. This is absolutely nuts. It's nuts. While TSA agents frisk Americans at airports for terroristic devices such as pocket knives, our government willfully allows illegal aliens carrying deadly diseases to invade the United States en masse. I'd say we live in an upside-down country. We have never averted an act of terrorism because of TSA, but we can document tens of thousands unsuspecting biological weapons walking into the United States as innocent children. Dr. Elizabeth Vlett points out that delays to see a doctor at the Phoenix VA hospital cost the lives of 58 veterans while waiting for care. This is just a portent of far more deaths to come from delays Americans' medical care as thousands of sick illegals swamp already overcrowded emergency rooms. People express concern about child endangerment from illegal minors dumped on Arizona streets in 100-plus degree heat with no support. A bigger concern is American endangerment from life-threatening diseases added to social and economic collapse from the cost of treating hundreds of thousands of illegals, not to mention the millions they will potentially infect. Oh, yeah, and there does remain one looming disease process entering our culture through the southwest border that can be 100% fatal if encountered. Yet it's little recognized, the media pays little attention to it, but it is monumental concern. And what is it? It's a new disease that you've probably not heard of, pronounced gangbangorrhea. This is the real face of Obama's open immigration policies. Yeah, a lot of people will pronounce this gangbangers for short. But the El Salvadorian MS-13 is unquestionably the worst of the worst. I don't want to know all the requirements to join MS-13, but some of the requirements to join include several rapes and at least one homicide. Remember Governor Perry's comment on the 3,000 homicides and 8,000 rapes just in Texas? And actually, this makes sense from the gang's perspective because once a person joins, having committed rapes and homicides, they are so wanted at that point that the only protection the individual has is through the gang. Gang members from this notoriously violent El Salvadorian gang, MS-13, are among the minors being housed by the Border Patrol under the Obama administration's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA program. Currently, Border Patrol guidelines, as absurd as this is, requires that all children under the age of 18 be treated the same, with the results that even confessed, violent criminals receive the same consideration and benefit from the federal government as other illegal immigrant minors. And make no mistake about it, many of these MS-13 members are well below the ages of 18. So what is happening is that these worst of the worst may even admit to torture and homicide in their home country, but as long as they're under the age of 18, they're processed, placed in detention with the general population, where they are actively recruiting new gang members, and then they're given an immigration hearing date and asked to return. Oh, that's going to happen. 97% of them don't return. Then they're bused on our dime to cities unknown across this country and take up residence in your own hometown. This is the most serious public safety concern when Border Patrol agents can't separate these people out from general population. And the truth is, to a very large extent, our Constitution is founded upon the Bible. And unquestionably, the American culture draws heavily upon biblical values. Therefore, I submit to you, for evaluation of how appropriate it is today, John 10, 1-6. I assure you that whoever doesn't enter into the sheep pen through the gate, but climbs over the wall, is a thief and an outlaw. The one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The guard at the gate opens the gate for him, and the sheep will listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Whenever he has gathered all his sheep, he goes before them, and they will follow him because they know his voice. They won't follow a stranger, but will run away because they don't know the stranger's voice. Those who heard Jesus use this analogy didn't understand what he was saying. I can only hope that our federal government and our state government hears what we're saying, and we invite you to join with us. The truth is, Veterans in Defense of Liberty would ask you to join with us and assure that our state government, as well as our federal government, hears our voice. So call your governor, call your state reps, call your senators, and join with us. Because in view of this scandal, perhaps the largest, most despicable, deliberate act of political child abuse in history, Veterans in Defense of Liberty hereby calls on all 50 states to assert on behalf of their citizens their sovereign right under the Constitution in demanding that the federal government fulfills its constitutional duty. All of the southwestern border states, particularly Texas, must serve notice on the federal government that the states have awakened from their deep slumber of apathy. Like the patient arising from the coma, the sovereignty muscles of the state have atrophied to a great extent, and they need to be exercised, but they are still there. Once the state determines to stand on the right reserved for them by the Constitution, and the federal government realizes that the status quo of simply treating the state as largely unimportant subdivisions of an administrative authority is no longer an acceptable option, American federalism, one of the great gifts given to the world by our founding fathers, may yet be preserved for generations of Americans. The truth is, while most Americans are curled up on the couch, the perfect storm is coming, and now is at our nation's back door. No longer a nation of laws, no longer the laws of nature and of nature's God prevail, but now the laws of man triumphs. Obamacare, $17 trillion in debt, Islamic states is coming, a porous border with our welcoming of MS-13, drug cartels, criminals, and biological weapons, weapons of mass destruction, by way of the most despicable example of child abuse in the history of the world, leading to potentially the most heinous epidemics the globe has ever experienced, obamademics. But the truth is like a lion. For God's sake, go forth and set it free. For our sake, for the sake of our nation, for the sake of our posterity, for the sake of all humanity, go forth and set it free. Go forth like the lion with the truth, and oppose the lies, oppose the paradox of tolerance, oppose the destruction of our country. Go forth, for God's sake, and set it free. Well, I want to thank you for sitting through the last hour. I started to say I hope you enjoyed it. There's nothing enjoyable about that. But there is a tremendous amount of truth in that. And I hope you have gained something from watching it. This slide, I think, depicts the whole essence of it. Islam's intention is to dominate the world. It has been for 1,400 years. Today, their tactics have changed, but their intention has not. I want to quote a quick quote to you from a dear friend's book, Bill Federer, William J. Federer, in a book that he wrote, What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran. And in this he said, Muhammad divided the world into two houses, the house of Islam, Dar al-Islam, and the house of war, Dar al-Harb. A Muslim therefore sees the world in two halves. One half is Muslim, The other half is in the process of becoming Muslim. Whereas most Americans think of world peace in terms of peaceful coexistence with those of differing beliefs, a Muslim thinks there will only be world peace when the whole world has submitted to the will of Allah. In short, becomes Muslim. And that's what the battle is today. If Islam wins, America falls. If America can stand up and beat back the radical Muslims, then America will remain, and Islam will remain in the background until some future time when it stirs again. We are repeating history today. What I have told you over the last hour is the truth, like the lion. I would encourage you, if you have a few minutes, probably 10 or 11, to watch the following PS. It's theory, a frightening theory where the pieces of the puzzle all fit together. Not conspiracy theory, but frightening theory. If you don't have the time, come back and watch it sometime. And again, I deeply appreciate your having watched. I deeply appreciate you having watched. And watch out for obamademics. Okay, so here's the deal. I debated with myself for several days as to whether or not to include this postscript on the presentation, but I do believe it is important that you have at least an introduction to this theory. It's my theory, and I assure you that I am not a conspiracy theorist. I'm much more pragmatic than that. I believe that it was aircraft that flew into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on 9/11. When I look up in the air and I see a contrail, I believe it is a contrail. The trouble is, when you rationally eliminate a lot of possibilities in today's world, sometimes you are only left with what could sound like conspiracy. That having been said, remember I asked you a while back to think about who is it we are at asymmetrical warfare with that has shown a tremendous willingness over the centuries to utilize children as human shields. Human shields in combat, as human shields for their armament, as suicide bombers. The answer is it's Islam. It's radical Islam. They use children and continue to train children for these functions. Now, put that part of the puzzle away for a minute and consider that in this massive tsunami of children coming across our border, we're supposed to believe that the family in Central America is paying $5,000 to $7,000 to the coyotes in order to bring these children across. Oh, really? The average income in Central America is $4,700 a year. Even if they mortgage the farm, which they probably can't, where are they going to come up with that type of money? They're not going to, so it's the old follow the money. Where is the money coming from? We know in Mexico there are multiple cities, much like London, that have large segments of the city that is Muslim, is Islam, ruled by Sharia. If you're not Muslim, you're not welcome. And they surely have the funding to be able to go down, pay the coyotes $5,000 to $7,000 to escort a child, pay the family another $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, whatever an amount that they would not see in their lifetime in one place, and here they come. Now, put that piece away. Suppose in some of the Islamic universities, and we know we have Muslim universities in the Middle East. There is one in Saudi Arabia, I believe. I think England has some. I think there's some in Scotland. Some of these centers of higher education. Suppose in one of these, they have now, for quite a period of time, been working with recombinant DNA. Recombinant DNA is a form of DNA that is produced by combining genetic material from two or more different sources by a means of genetic engineering. Recombinant DNA can be used to change the genetic makeup of a cell. There are some incredibly powerful and good reasons this is being done. For example, to make a bacteria that produces insulin. There's some very nefarious reasons this is being done. Cloning is a prime example. But suppose another nefarious reason is to take virus cells, manipulate them genetically so that they have a latency period of 2, 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months. That's a period that if somebody were to contact a virus, they could be potentially infective, that is, infect other people for months and months before they come down with any symptoms of the disease. And suppose that this new virus that is being worked on is like Ebola and has a 90% fatality rate. Now, suppose they perfected that and were able to inoculate children coming across our border with this new deadly and very contagious virus, which is spread by the aerosol route, which would make a lot of good sense. These children are now farmed across the United States, and suddenly at some time months down the road, there is a massive epidemic which is going to annihilate a large population. And would that not be a great time for ISIS, who I just heard today say they were going to divide the United States into two, TWO into two? Does that not go along with what we read from Bill Federer a little while ago? That's the two houses of Islam that he's talking about. Would that not be a good time for ISIS to keep their word and meet you in New York? Now we have a massive epidemic going on, and all of a sudden we have ISIS hitting us at the same time. Just a theory. You say, oh, well, they couldn't do that. Well, yes, they could do that. It is being done on all types of cells. Say that, well, there's no evidence that they're doing it, or even would think about it. Remember, their tactics change, but their intention stays the same. You say, what about SARS? Remember SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, occurred in between 2002 and 2003 in China, caused 775 deaths. We were told originally that this SARS was from bats. All of a sudden SARS disappeared. We don't see it anymore. The last case, I think, was probably in 2003. So what? The bats went out and cured themselves or quit biting humans? I don't think so. And just this year, I have seen it put out that, in fact, this was a coronavirus. Coronavirus is the same virus that causes 15% of the common colds. Suppose that was trial one. And then just last year, all of a sudden in Saudi Arabia, we see MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. Guess what? It also was a coronavirus. It was so bad that during one of the Muslim holidays, other countries were suggesting strongly that their population not go participate in the holiday in Saudi Arabia because of MERS. MERS is, like I said, also a coronavirus. The official party line is, well, it probably, there's a lot, there's a high likelihood that it originated from an animal, but they have no idea. They do know that MERS-CoV, which is the actual name of the virus, is dissimilar to any other coronavirus. So what if that was trial one and trial two? What if third time is the charm? A whole new meaning to the truth that children are being used today and in the future as biological weapons, weapons of mass destruction, brought to you by the folks of Islam. Thank you much. God bless.